What is this? How would you describe it? What about this? How does it make you feel? Is this funny? Scary? Unsettling? Dissonant? What words can you use here? Is this comedy or horror? The uncanny or just the unexpected? Disorienting or just disorganized? Can you even describe it? Or are you at a loss? Despite the fact that it's clearly having some kind of effect on you, despite the fact that some of these visuals will lodge themselves in your brain for weeks, even if you don't want them to, do you even know what to think? What is all of this? What is it? It's uncomfortable, isn't it? Not to know how you're supposed to feel. It's sort of an unusual position for a piece of media to put you in. Usually you want to sort of get what you're watching, how to categorize it, especially when it comes to horror. But here we have an entire category of horror that isn't really categorical. Horror that isn't designed to scare you. Horror that, a lot of the time, is just as likely to make you laugh, but never enough to let your guard down. A girl slowly sinks through the floor in the kitchen while her family carries on as usual around her, until they realize what's going on. A mysterious channel advertises pills that will unlock brand new emotions within you, most of which appear to be physically impossible. A child wanders through a grotesquely animated world of caricatures, all just a distorted memory of times long past. It's not clear whether these even actually qualify as horror. So why are they haunting me? Why have I been thinking about these works for years, trying to place this weird way that they're making me feel? How is this some of the most effective horror I've ever encountered, even though it barely looks like horror at all? Comedy and horror aren't opposites. I think anybody watching this video probably already knows that. They work really well together in a lot of interesting ways. There's something delightfully absurd about hyperviolence in the right context, think Super Jail or The Midnight Gospel, and there's something really disarming about some unexpected levity in an otherwise gruesome piece. Think, any Sam Raimi film. But you can usually tell what a given piece is supposed to be. Even if a movie is technically horror, if it's making you laugh enough, it's really just a dark comedy. Even if a movie makes you laugh sometimes, if it's dark enough, it's really just pulp horror. Intuition doesn't usually fail you on this stuff, but because the line is so strangely fine between horror and comedy, it can. That potential is definitely there. Like, look at this. This is David Lewandowski's YouTube video going to the store. Not particularly scary, but can you imagine that thing without the silly music? Maybe without the bright, sunny day? Encountering it, say, in a parking garage at night? In the context of the video, it's harmless and silly. In any other, this guy is completely disfigured. By all accounts, it should trigger some instinct to flee, right? How could this happen to somebody? What mangled this person so terribly? Or worse, what laws of reality are you watching it violate? When you think about it, that's a disturbingly fine line for something so primal, isn't it? That your entire interpretation of something as a threat could hinge on soundtrack and lighting. What gives? It's hard to find real scientific consensus about how humor works. The laugh response isn't a very well understood mechanism. We know that laughter and fear have a lot in common. They both typically involve an emotional buildup, followed by a release of that tension, the eventual laugh, the scream. We also know the associated signals sometimes get mixed up, and people will end up laughing during scary situations, often as a coping mechanism for trauma. I'm not sure it's as common to shriek in terror during funny situations, but you never know. As for why people find things funny or scary, I haven't found anything definitive, but I did find a few interesting theories. One of the most interesting, in my opinion, has to do with incongruity, things that are funny because the results don't match the expectation. If we have time to see the bus coming before it hits the guy walking across the street, it's dramatic. It creates tension and allows time for the action to resolve, the tension to be released. It's congruent to the tone of the situation. If we don't, say we're in the middle of an otherwise upbeat, romantic scene, and then a bus just comes out of nowhere and sweeps the guy off screen. Morbid, yeah, but come on. How don't you laugh? It's so unexpected. Incongruent. It doesn't match the moment at all. It's almost like it short-circuits your brain and you have to react. It doesn't even necessarily have to be that dramatic. It could be something simple and mundane. You could name one of your socks Clyde, and that's funny because socks aren't supposed to have human names. It would be even funnier if you named the other sock Bonnie, because that creates a split second of tension as the person you're telling it to puts together the pieces, which is then released as they realize you named a pair of socks after the famous outlaw duo Bonnie and Clyde. But incongruity can be scary too. For instance, you would probably react very differently if you found out an acquaintance named their socks after you. Another theory for why things are funny centers on a concept called benign violation. It describes the feeling when you realize that some rule or norm has been violated, while at the same time understanding it isn't threatening or offensive. For this one, imagine a boardroom full of grave, silent business moguls at a conference table with one empty seat. When the last member comes in, instead of taking the empty seat, he very seriously pulls out one of the other's chairs and sits in his lap. That's a huge violation of a social norm in any situation, but especially at a professional meeting like that. It's also obviously not a threat. So, it's funny. If, instead of sitting on his coworker, he'd stabbed the guy, well, that would be a different story. But even then, the stab could be so unexpected, so incongruent to the rest of the scene, that it's still funny. Easy to imagine a dark comedy where that's the punchline, honestly. Are you starting to notice something here? Yeah, me too. It almost seems like what actually happens isn't really as important as how it's all set up. The unexpected can be scary, but if it's too unexpected and doesn't match the context at all, it's probably just going to make you laugh. Violations of normality can, of course, be scary when they're framed as something threatening. Otherwise, it's just kind of funny. Madly flailing default model walking down the street on a sunny day? Comedy. Contorted human silhouette coming toward you in a dark parking garage? Horror. In psychology, this is a phenomenon known as priming, when one experience unconsciously affects the way someone responds to another experience later. It's a very versatile concept that can refer to anything from a childhood trauma to hearing a certain word used right before taking a test. As long as it affects a later experience, it counts. Horror tends to prime us to be scared beforehand by invoking things that make us feel uncomfortable. That's why so many horror settings start out grimy, dark, and filled with broken furniture before anything bad even happens. You're already on edge, so it's easier to ramp up the tension, and when that tension breaks, you're almost certain to find it scary, not funny. But what if what you're primed for isn't what you end up getting? What if something makes you think it's going to be a comedy, only to become horror at the last minute, or vice versa? A lot of parodies use this trick to convey a message, like the viral series Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which uses the veneer of a British children's show to create a hauntingly uncomfortable critique of the industry. And it's very effective at that, but I'm picturing something a little bit more like this. You're watching a wildlife video and you're interrupted by an allergy medicine commercial. Something like this has happened to you thousands of times throughout your YouTube watching existence. It's so familiar that your brain just turns off. And therefore, you are caught completely by surprise when the allergy medicine commercial doesn't end, but escalates into a short horror film about the woman in the commercial being pursued by a bloody doppelganger. That, by the way, is unedited footage of a bear, a real short film by Wham City Comedy, which was originally aired on Adult Swim. But in a weird way. Adult Swim has a specific time slot around 4 a.m. reserved for crazy experiments like this, and some of the best examples of this sort of surprising comedy until it's not horror made their first debut there. If you're at all familiar with this network, you probably already know another great example. Too Many Cooks. It starts out as a parody of those early 90s family sitcom themes, you know the ones. You go in, of course, expecting the song to end and the show to start at some point, but then it just keeps going, and eventually it turns into something else altogether. It's still a theme song, but now it's following a serial killer as he stalks his victims through each scene, killing them in progressively stranger ways. There are a few other notable examples of this style of horror out there, like Casper Kelly's Yule Log by the same director as Too Many Cooks, but suffice it to say that the bait and switch works. It leaves you reeling in a wonderful, almost heady way. There's a reason these pieces went viral when they came out, and why people are still making think pieces about them to this very day. They also aren't really what I'm talking about here. Don't get me wrong, they're very close, but they're a little too easy to categorize. Some of them are parodies. They use the surprise of the false priming as the setup for a joke. The horror acts as a punchline. Or, like unedited footage of a bear, it ends up as horror, whatever it may have started as. You figure it out eventually. One way or another, the tension resolves. You at least know how you're supposed to feel by the end. What I'm talking about is horror where that doesn't happen. Where that tension, that uncertainty, just keeps building and building, playing with you so that you're not sure whether to let your guard down and laugh or keep it up because something's clearly not right here. That's what I'm talking about. Horror that won't let you be sure it's horror. And to talk about that, we have to turn to the master of the genre, Alan Resnick. Alan Resnick is a visual and performance artist. He co-founded Wham City Comedy, the now-defunct group that created unedited footage of a bear and a bunch of other well-known pieces. But he has his own individual projects too, and some of them are weird. One in particular stands out. Alan Tutorial, as the name might suggest, is a tutorial channel here on YouTube. The owner, the character Alan plays, is a tremulous, childlike man who seems to be obsessed with making strange tutorials for nonsensical and pointless tasks like how to leak on a piece of paper and how to pick up a blue chair off the ground. He completes all his tasks one-handed, the other hand holding the camera in a way that is less than helpful for us actually watching the video. Alan Tutorial does eventually become full-fledged horror later on in the series, although it's subtler than most of the gory examples we've covered so far. But I was feeling scared in these videos long before they took that turn. Not because there's anything overtly threatening about them. Alan's character seems like a sweet guy, in fact. It's just this sense of wrongness that pervades the whole series. When Alan uses water in his tutorials, it comes out as a sort of clear, gloopy gel like hand sanitizer. Alan never comments on this or acts as though it's unusual. When he tries to pour lemon juice into what he claims is guacamole and it comes out as a cement-like paste, he offhandedly assures us,
"If it's chunky, it doesn't matter."
It's almost funny. Almost. But I can't quite get there. Rather than resolve the tension, Alan holds me in it, suspending me without recourse until I feel like I'm losing my mind. I want to understand what's happening so I can decide whether or not to be afraid of it, but Alan Resnick does not grant his audience that mercy. It might seem like an oxymoron to say that there's some horror that's just not scary. It especially might seem like an oxymoron to say that that type of horror is the scariest of all. What makes it scary, though, is that exact paradox. It's scary because we don't know if it's scary. We're not allowed to know. And so these types of weird horror defy that simple, discrete characterization. When a journalist asked Resnick about whether This House Has People in It, one of his most beloved pieces, was a comedy or a horror, he had this to say. "To me, it is funny, so I want to call it a comedy. To other people, it's not funny at all and just upsetting. Even within the creators of the show, you might get a different response to that question. This kind of horror fails to prime us to be scared. It also fails to prime us to be amused. It's not that it subverts our expectations, it gives us conflicting expectations to begin with and leaves us uncertain. In the same way that a slasher flick might cause terror, works like Alan Tutorial and This House Has People in It cause anxiety. And that's almost scarier than terror, because when you're afraid, at least you know whether to run. Of course, some of the scariest things in life are the ones you can see coming miles away. Things you know are scary, but you feel powerless to run from. More existential terrors. The fear of failure, of living a life you can't look back on with pride, of wasting the little time you have on this planet. Did you know that most people spend about 80,000 hours of their life just working? Doing tasks to get money to pay for the things they need. Don't you wish sometimes that you could just get out of that grind? Spend that time to make a difference in the world? There has to be a way to work your career, earn your bread, and feel like your existence is meaningful at the same time, right? A better way to spend those 80,000 hours? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is, and this is barely a sponsor spot because there's no sell, no product, nothing at all for you to spend your money on. This really is me purely telling you that there's a way to make a real impact on the world and that you really can find work that will allow you to create legitimate change. There are incredible, meaningful jobs out there that you may never even have thought of. And you don't have to go find them on your own or chance upon them, because today, our sponsor is ready to help you. Let me introduce you to 80,000 Hours, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping you make the most of your 80,000 career hours. They've been doing this for over 10 years, have already helped over 1,000 people find their calling, and have so many resources just waiting for you to lay hold of. With the help of hundreds of experts and academic organizations, they've studied tirelessly to figure out what career paths stand to make the biggest impact on the world, and they've laid out paths to access them as well. Turns out you don't have to be a doctor or a teacher or a charity worker to change lives. Maybe you want to be an AI safety advisor working in a lab to make sure the robots don't get out of hand, or a nuclear security research assistant helping prevent mankind from turning itself to ashes. Or maybe you just want to make a career out of addressing climate change. No shortage of hands needed there. And if you're still trying to figure out what issues matter most to you personally, where you want to spend your time trying to make an impact, the website is loaded with educational materials as well. From a free guide that they give you right on the landing page of the website, to an incredibly good podcast where they interview experts from every field, to one-on-one calls with impartial advisors who can help you find some career directions that you find promising, this site, it's built to change your life. And I can't stress enough that literally everything they offer is free. Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. An absolutely massive thanks to them for giving us the opportunity to tell you about this thing that they've created for you. Definitely one of the coolest sponsors we've had on the show. I really hope you'll give it a look. Again, that's 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry. Imagine reclaiming 80,000 hours of your life, turning all that time from mindless labor just to put food on the table to something you feel passionate about, something that changes the world. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye.